She didn't notice I'd stopped talking until the dishwasher beeped. I was standing in the kitchen, hands still on the sink, not blinking. She was sitting behind me, swirling the last of her wine, her voice sharp with cheap Chardonnay and something far uglier. "God, you really are sulking," she laughed. "What is it this time, huh? I didn't compliment your little spreadsheet? I forgot the thrilling details of your quarterly board meeting? Poor baby." I stacked the final plate in silence. My fingers trembled for just a second as the plate met the others. Not from rage. Not anymore. That emotion had come and gone like a cold snap in March, sharp, unwelcome, but brief. What was left now was something colder, thinner, like breath fogging on glass and vanishing just as fast. She didn't know it, but that moment, the clink of the plate, the slow turn of her voice from mocking to dismissive, was the last she'd ever see of the man she used to know. "Do you even hear yourself?" she added, not expecting an answer. "You go all weird and broody for weeks and then expect me to decode it like some tragic poem. Grow up, James." Seriously. I didn't turn around, just wiped down the granite countertop with slow, deliberate movements. I wiped it twice, then a third time, not because it needed it, but because I wanted my hands to be doing something while my mind finished what it had already decided. I walked past her without looking, upstairs. Lights off. I lay in bed wide awake, staring at the ceiling. I could hear her pouring more wine, could hear the TV flicker on. Some rerun sitcom filling the room with canned laughter and the clink of her glass hitting the side table. At some point, I heard her snoring. I was gone by 3 a.m. No suitcase. No note. I took the emergency cash hidden in the tool chest in the garage. $2,000 I'd squirreled away for, just in case. My ID? Left in the drawer. Credit cards? Snapped and flushed. The only thing I took with me was a laminated photo of my grandfather's hardware store, circa 1956, back when men built lives with their hands, not PowerPoint decks. By sunrise, my car was parked at long-term parking in a different city. I didn't take it to vanish, I left it as bait. She'd find it. She'd think it meant I was lost, broken, that I'd wandered into the world unhinged. Good. Let her think whatever she wanted. That was always her specialty anyway. Writing the story, casting herself as the protagonist, and the rest of us as supporting clowns. I boarded a train under a name I hadn't used in 15 years. Then a bus. Then another train. Each transfer cutting the cord further. I didn't sleep. Didn't eat until the second day. Not because I was emotional, but because I didn't want to waste even that moment on something as indulgent as a sandwich. Somewhere along the Tennessee border, in a greasy station filled with truckers and high school dropouts, I bought a prepaid flip phone, a burner email, and a notebook. One page for every part of my old life I was deleting. One line at a time. Marriage, career, name, bank accounts, social security number, my face. Men don't scream when they snap. We evaporate. And before I go on, I need to say this to the 97% of you listening who haven't hit that subscribe button yet. Yeah, I see the numbers, we notice. It's the quiet support that lets stories like this one keep going. It's what motivates the team behind the scenes. So if you're still here and still listening, hit that subscribe. Helps more than you know. Back to her. Hannah didn't realize anything was wrong until late afternoon. She assumed I'd gone for a drive. Maybe stewing in the parking lot at a Denny's or at the pier. But when the sun began to set and the house was still silent, she texted me once. Then again. No response. By midnight, she checked the driveway. At 1 a.m., she called my phone. Straight to voicemail. By sunrise, she started calling friends. But none had heard from me, because I hadn't told anyone. That's the point of becoming a ghost. You don't announce the haunting. 3 days later, she finally went to the airport where my car was found. Empty. Clean. Like it had just rolled off the lot. She expected a suicide note. There was none. She expected some angry, bitter message. Maybe an email timestamped at 3:01 a.m. with, "I hope you're happy now." She got silence. And that's what got to her. Not the leaving. The quiet. Silence has weight. Presses against the chest. You can scream over noise. But silence? That's when you start arguing with your own guilt. She had plenty of it. And I knew she'd try to drown it in self-importance. He's being dramatic. He'll be back when he cools off. Men always come crawling back. But I wasn't crawling. I was erasing. And the first thing I scrubbed clean was her. The phone sat in her palm. Lifeless. She tried everything. Charging it, hard resetting, calling from a dozen numbers. Nothing. It wasn't off. It was erased. No SIM. No fingerprints. Just a blank screen that used to carry his whole life. 2 weeks in, she finally stopped pacing the hallways at night. Not because she was calm, but because her legs were cramping from exhaustion. She sat at the dining room table with a half-eaten box of takeout and stared at the envelope that had arrived that morning. Certified mail, neat handwriting, no return address. Inside, a notarized statement relinquishing power of attorney, full transfer of vehicle title, property title, and bank authorizations. Everything in her name. Everything legal. Signed. Dated. No note. No explanation. Just cold, surgical logistics. At first, she thought it was a bluff. Some melodramatic punishment for her sarcasm. For the way she'd laughed that night. But James wasn't dramatic. He was boring, predictable. He loved routine like a religion. Same lunch every day. Iron shirts. Financial podcasts. Men like that don't just snap. But he had. And the strangest part? He did it cleanly. No breadcrumbs. No signs. No digital tantrum. No calls to friends. No money moved. No suspicious purchases. His last transaction was a gas station 2 towns over, exactly 72 minutes before his car was found abandoned at the airport parking garage. That was the last verified trace of him. When she called his employer, they told her he'd formally resigned. Through a lawyer. Quietly. No fuss. Effective immediately. They were sad to see him go. His manager said with polite confusion. But of course, we respect his decision. His email? Deleted. His work laptop? Wiped. And then the real silence began. Mail accumulated at the doorstep. A pile of coupons, subscription catalogs, and an unopened envelope from the IRS. She left it there for 3 days before finally bending down and stuffing it into a drawer. Out of sight, neighbors started asking polite questions. James okay? Did he go visit family? She smiled too quickly. Oh yeah, he's just off the grid for a while. One of them raised an eyebrow. James? Off the grid? That's not really his style. Exactly. She started checking security footage from the front door camera. Watched herself waving goodbye to him as she stepped into her rideshare that night. He hadn't waved back. She rewound it. Watched again. Still nothing. Just him standing there, arms at his side, the porch light making him look older than he was. She began calling hospitals under different names. Then shelters, jails, even morgues. They all said the same thing. No one by that name. No one matching that description. Her unease turned into something sour, like old wine left open on the counter. Familiar at first, but rotting quickly. She checked his credit score. Flatlined. No new pulls. No applications. No purchases. The account he had for utilities had been closed. The Spotify family plan booted her off without warning. The bank confirmed. All cards voluntarily canceled. His name was becoming blank. Eventually, she called the police. The officer on the line didn't sound concerned. How long's he been gone? Almost a month, she said, her voice cracking for the first time. Did he leave a note? No. Was there a fight? No. I mean, no more than usual. Any reason to believe he harmed himself? I know. I don't think so. Does he have a history of disappearing? No. Never. The officer sighed. Look, ma'am. It's not uncommon for someone to take a break, especially if there's no sign of foul play. He's an adult. He left everything legally in your name. Sounds like he wanted space. Space? She snapped. This isn't space. This is a disappearance. Not if it was intentional, he said. That line stuck with her. Not if it was intentional. Intentional. That word kept repeating in her skull like a drumbeat. Because it was. Everything about his exit was intentional. Legal transfers. Wipe tech. No chaos. No trace. A man doesn't go to that much effort unless he wants one thing. To never be found. And what bothered her most? No one seemed alarmed. Not his work. Not the police. Not even his distant cousin in Idaho who replied to her email with, well, maybe he's better off wherever he is. As if they all knew something she didn't. As if she was the last to realize. The ghosting wasn't accidental. It was planned. She wasn't grieving a loss. She was being erased from a man's story that she once starred in. And that was only the beginning. By the 6th week, her voice was hoarse from leaving messages to strangers who didn't know or care who James was. She had called the local shelters so often the receptionist at one halfway house recognized her number and answered with a weary, no, ma'am, Still nothing. She tried hospitals in 3 counties, then 5, then entire states. She found herself spelling his name slower and slower, as if careful enunciation would somehow conjure him from the records. James. Last name redacted. 6'1". Scar above his right brow. No tattoos. Not violent. Each time she heard a polite pause and then the same words. No one by that name. She posted his photo on every social media platform she could still remember passwords for. Facebook groups for missing people, subreddits, local neighborhood apps, even the community bulletin of his old college alumni association. The posts got likes, sympathy emojis, the occasional prayers comment, but no leads. Not a single credible sighting. Not a single private message with a clue. Just a stream of strangers who thought they understood what missing meant, but had never felt the cavity it carved in your chest. The police finally assigned a case number but didn't send anyone out. No signs of foul play, the detective wrote in his email. All property voluntarily transferred. That word again, voluntarily. It made her grind her teeth. If James had left a scorched earth note, or a screaming voicemail, or emptied their bank account, at least she'd have a villain to fight. But this was like being erased by a surgeon's scalpel. When she hired the private investigator, she felt a flicker of relief. The man was a retired IRS fraud analyst who moonlighted in asset recovery. If there's a trail, I'll find it, he promised. He took her retainer without blinking, scribbled down a few details about James's last movements, and told her to try to get some sleep. 3 weeks later, he met her in a diner off the highway. He slid a thin folder across the table. That's everything, he said. And I mean everything. The folder was practically empty. A single printout from the DMV confirming the voluntary vehicle transfer. A page from their mortgage bank confirming her new sole ownership. A few notes scribbled in his messy hand. Phone burned. Utilities closed. Taxes no filings. No current employment verification. She blinked at him. That's it. He rubbed his eyes. Lady, I don't know how to tell you this except straight. It's like he never existed. He didn't just disappear. He was prepared. Prepared. She clutched the folder so tightly the paper crinkled. You're supposed to be good at this. He leaned back. I am, but I track people who run. He didn't run. He removed himself. And he did it cleaner than anyone I've ever seen. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. So he's alive? I can't say. All I can say is, there's no trace of him in any system I can access. Not tax. Not credit. Not employment. Not healthcare. It's like chasing smoke. Her father, who had come along for moral support, gave a low whistle. That's something, he muttered. Maybe it's time to start preparing for probate. If he's gone, and there's no sign, she whipped her head toward him. I don't want money. Sweetheart. I don't want a death certificate. I don't want a house that feels like a mausoleum. I want to talk to him. I want him to tell me why. The PI closed his folder. Maybe you should hire a therapist instead of me, he said gently. This guy, he didn't just leave you. He left everything. That's not a midlife crisis. That's something deeper. She stared down at the folder again. No, she whispered. This isn't deeper. This is revenge. Her father shifted uncomfortably. Revenge? For what? You had an argument. She didn't answer, because she didn't know. All she had were fragments of the last night they'd eaten together. The sound of his fork on the plate, his eyes like glass, her own laugh echoing off the kitchen tiles. In hindsight, it sounded like the last words of a man boarding a lifeboat. And the most frightening part wasn't that he was gone. It was that maybe, just maybe, he'd chosen it. Because if he chose it, then the ghost she'd been chasing wasn't lost. He was hiding, and he had a reason. It started subtly, the way a cold creeps in. First a scratch in the throat, then a heaviness behind the eyes. Only instead of symptoms, it was silence. Messages that used to be replied to within minutes now sat unread for hours. Invitations went out and came back with, sorry, busy that weekend. She told herself it was in her head. Everyone was just distracted, tired, busy with their own problems. But then her friend Dana, who'd once called James the most decent man she'd ever met, suddenly declined her brunch invite with a flat, I don't feel comfortable, Hannah. I'm sorry. No explanation. Just the kind of quiet judgment that sticks in your ribs like a splinter. Another friend, Sophie, simply ghosted her. Blocked her on Instagram. Unfriended her on Facebook. Gone. She tried to call. Left voicemails. Can we talk? Did I do something? No reply. And then there were the whispers. Not loud, not public. But she could hear them in the pause before her coworkers greeted her in the morning. She could see it in the shift of body language at baby showers and neighborhood gatherings. People had taken a side, and it wasn't hers. Somewhere in their minds, James had gone from vanished husband to poor man who must have suffered. It didn't matter that she didn't hit him, didn't cheat, didn't drive him away in any obvious, dramatic fashion. What mattered was the accumulation, the years of sarcasm, the public digs, the private jabs dressed up as jokes. The way he always looked worn thin, like a man constantly apologizing for something he couldn't name. Even her own family started to look at her differently. Her mother asked over coffee one morning, "Are you sure he didn't say anything that night?" "Not a word." "No," Hannah snapped. "He cleared the dishes, wiped the counter, went to bed." "Did you say anything?" She hesitated. "We had a normal dinner." Her sister raised an eyebrow. "You said he sulked." "That's not normal." The word sulked hung in the air like smoke. Her sister didn't press, but her silence said enough. A week later, her father asked if she'd really tried everything. Like maybe she was missing something. Like maybe James's silence wasn't just escape, but indictment. That night, Hannah sat on the floor of the laundry room, shaking. Not from grief, from confusion, from the growing suspicion that somehow she was the villain of this story, and she just hadn't gotten the memo. The PI called again. His voice was strained. "Still no digital trace," he said. "No DMV hits, no credit events, no tax submissions." "At this point, Hannah, there's a chance he's not alive." She scoffed. "You just told me he was the cleanest ghosting you've ever seen." "Yes," he said slowly. "But even the cleanest ghosts trip up eventually. They slip, they resurface. Unless they're dead. Or something else." A pause. Something worse. She didn't ask what that meant. But 2 days later, while scrolling through her sister's texts, a strange message blinked across the screen. A photo. Not of James, exactly. Of a magazine article. Her sister had sent it without comment. A local newsletter covering a downtown redevelopment project. "Reviving Old City," the headline read. The article was brief, full of architectural jargon and economic optimism. But it was the picture that caught her breath. A group photo, blurred in the background, mid-conversation, was a man in a dark coat, sunglasses, and graying beard. He was slightly turned away, but not enough. She zoomed in. Her heart stuttered. Jawline, shoulders, that little forward tilt of his head when listening. She stared at the image for minutes. Her sister's message followed. "You know that downtown development? The guy behind it looks a lot like James." Hannah didn't respond. She sat there on the floor, legs numb, staring at the photo like it might change if she blinked long enough. If it was James, he wasn't hiding in a shack in the woods. He wasn't living off-grid in a trailer. He was behind something public, something big. And the cruelest twist? He wasn't dead. He was building, which meant he hadn't lost himself. He hadn't spiraled. He had a plan. And maybe, just maybe, he was watching. The steam rose in thick waves from the industrial sink, coating his arms in damp heat as he scrubbed baked-on grease from chipped plates and crusted soup bowls. His back ached. His fingers were raw from detergent. But James, now going by Michael, scrubbed like a machine, methodical, tireless. Every plate that passed through his hands was a tiny ritual in control. The diner was the kind of place that never closed and never asked questions. It sat off a forgotten highway in a town small enough to vanish on a map, and yet large enough to attract the kind of characters who didn't like being seen. He'd arrived there almost a year ago, stepping off a Greyhound with nothing but a beat-up backpack and a laminated ID he'd bought for cash from a guy who smelled like cigarettes and printer ink. The name on it, Michael Weller. Birth date a few years off. State of issue one he'd never lived in. Didn't matter. Past. He walked into the diner and asked for a job. The manager, Luther, a former boxer with a shattered nose and a surprising love for crossword puzzles, looked him up and down and asked, "You running from something or to something?" "Just hungry," James had said. "Michael now." Luther nodded. "That's fair." They paid in cash. Under the table. No tax forms. No questions. Just $12 an hour and whatever leftovers the kitchen didn't toss. And Michael never complained. When other dishwashers flaked out or got caught dealing pills in the alley, he stayed. Showed up early. Left late. Never made waves. But on his breaks, he didn't smoke or scroll on his phone like the others. He sat in the corner booth with a legal pad, a printed copy of The Economist or a real estate blog someone left behind, and a cup of black coffee. He read quietly, took notes, highlighted zoning changes, memorized local ordinances. He watched the patterns of people, how the truckers tipped differently from the traveling salesmen, how the late-night cooks bartered overtime shifts like prison trades. He was studying the ecosystem. Luther noticed. "You went to school or something?" he asked one day, wiping down a booth beside him. Michael shrugged. "I read." "You read like someone planning something." Another shrug. "Maybe." Within 3 months, he wasn't just washing dishes. He was managing orders, then inventory, then negotiating better rates with suppliers when Luther realized Michael had a weird talent for talking people down without raising his voice. "You ever run a business?" Luther asked. "Once," Michael said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Didn't end well." "You screw it up?" "No. Just didn't belong in it anymore." He didn't elaborate. He never did. Customers came and went. One of them, a quiet man in tailored coats and a permanent tan, came in every Thursday at 11 p.m., sat at the bar, ate a BLT with extra mayo, drank club soda with lime, read legal briefs. Michael watched him, too. It took months before the man spoke directly to him. "You always read financials?" he asked casually one night, tapping the magazine under Michael's arm. Michael nodded. "Helps me sleep." "Strange lullaby." Michael smirked. "You'd be surprised how soothing municipal bond spreads can be." The man laughed. A quiet, curious laugh. "What's your background?" "Washing dishes." "Before that?" Michael looked him dead in the eye. "I don't do before." The man nodded like he respected that. 2 weeks later, the man came in earlier than usual. Slid into a booth across from Michael. Didn't order. "I run a property group. Small. Focused. We buy distressed zones before they hit the radar. Flip 'em. Lease 'em. Grow 'em. I've been watching you." Michael sipped his coffee. "Creepy." The man smirked. "I'm serious. You have an eye." I asked around. "Luther says you saved him $5,000 on inventory this quarter." "Lucky month." "No. Not luck." He leaned in. "I'm backing a new venture. Want in?" Michael didn't blink. "What kind of stake?" "Equity." "How much freedom?" "Enough." Michael finished his coffee, set the mug down slowly. "I have something in mind." He didn't smile, didn't nod, just quietly got up, went back to the kitchen, and finished loading the dishwasher. Later that night, he pulled out his notebook and flipped to a page near the middle. One he hadn't touched since the bus ride. On it was a crude map of a city he hadn't set foot in for over a year. Red circles marked areas he knew were weak, economically, structurally, emotionally. He added a new line underneath. Phase 1. Initiate contact with capital. Because now it wasn't about survival. It was about construction. Not of buildings. Of purpose. He wasn't James anymore. He was Michael. And Michael had work to do. She hadn't meant to pick up the magazine. It was just sitting there on the waiting room table, next to a pile of dog-eared trade publications, golf catalogs, and a glossy local lifestyle magazine with a cover boasting, "Meet the Titans of Urban Renewal." The title meant nothing. The only reason she opened it was to distract herself from the awkward silence while waiting for her dentist to finish with the previous patient. But then page 43. Halfway through an article about revitalized real estate zones in the Mid-South. And there it was. Not the name. The name listed was Michael Weller, a quiet partner, in a new mixed-use development downtown. But the photo, God, the photo. It was blurry, sure. The man was turned slightly, mid-conversation, sunglasses on, graying beard. But she would have known that posture anywhere. That tilt of the head, the angle of his shoulder, the way his left hand hung loosely while the right gestured with just a fingertip. Her vision tunneled. Her pulse roared in her ears. She stared at the image until the dental receptionist called her name twice. When she finally sat in the exam chair, the hygienist asked if she was okay. She just nodded, her fingers digging into her phone. She didn't even make it home before calling the PI. "There's a photo," she said, voice trembling. "Page 43 of Metro Business Pulse." Blurred shot. But I know it's him. A pause. Then the sound of a keyboard. Clicking, clicking, clicking. Hannah, he said cautiously. That photo was taken at a property expo in Kentucky, 2 states over. 6 weeks ago. I don't care if it was taken on the moon, she snapped. It's him. I'll look into it. But you need to prepare for the possibility it's not. She didn't wait. She booked a flight that night. Red-eye. 1 checked bag. 2 copies of the magazine, 1 folded to the photo, the other pristine. She didn't sleep. Not a single blink. She stared at the back of the airplane seat in front of her and imagined the conversation over and over. What would she say? Would she scream? Cry? Beg? Or would she just stare at him? Like he'd done all those nights she rolled her eyes and told him he was too sensitive for his own good? By the time the plane landed, her nerves were shredded. Her legs stiff, hands clammy. She rented a car at the airport, nothing fancy, and drove to the convention center listed in the magazine's photo caption. The expo was still going. Final day. She parked across the street and sat there for 20 minutes, engine idling. People walked in and out of the tall glass doors. Developers, brokers, executives in suits with pressed lanyards around their necks. She scanned every man, every beard, every posture, but none matched. Finally, she killed the engine and stepped out. The wind caught her coat as she crossed the street, and for a brief second she caught her reflection in the glass. Tired, desperate, older than she remembered herself being. She pulled the magazine from her purse and clutched it like a map. Inside, the expo was chaos. Rows of booths with banners like Green District Financing and Zoning Reform Advocates. She weaved through them, heart pounding, eyes darting. A man turned from a booth, tall, sunglasses perched on his head, graying beard. Her stomach flipped. But when he looked at her, it wasn't James. Not even close. She moved deeper. At the far end of the hall, a conference room emptied. A group of men emerged. One of them walked like him. Broad shoulders, careful stride, long fingers gripping a legal pad. He turned slightly. Her breath hitched. But then he turned fully and again wrong. She stumbled to a bench and sat down. Magazine open in her lap, scanning the photo again and again. Maybe she was losing her mind. Maybe grief could shape illusions this convincingly. She pulled out her phone and texted the PI. No sign. Yet. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then movement in the reflection. Behind the glass wall of a side office, a figure passed. Quick, purposeful, taller than the others. Coat sharp, beard trimmed, sunglasses in hand. He didn't look at her, didn't even glance. But every hair on her body stood up. Her legs moved before her brain did. She darted toward the door, too late. The office was locked. Lights off. The hallway beyond empty. She stood there, frozen, one hand pressed against the glass. Her phone buzzed. A reply from the PI. Even if it is him, what then? She stared at the message. She didn't know the answer. All she knew was this. He wasn't dead. He wasn't broken. He wasn't lost. He was here. And she had no idea what he was building. The next morning, she woke in a chain hotel off the freeway with barely 3 hours of broken sleep and a pit the size of a crater in her chest. Her hands trembled as she sipped burnt lobby coffee. Her eyes glued to the company name she'd circled in the magazine a dozen times the night before. Weller Urban Properties. She looked up the address. Midtown. The building was sleek glass and steel, barely a few years old. A corporate front that smelled like capital and air conditioning. A place that wouldn't look twice at a woman in yesterday's coat and under-eye bags. She still went. She didn't wear makeup. Didn't brush her hair. She wanted him to see her as she was. Unvarnished, cracked open. The receptionist was behind a minimalist desk, young, with a razor-sharp bob and bored eyes scanning a spreadsheet. "Hi," Hannah said, holding her voice steady. "I'm here to see James." The receptionist didn't even glance up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll want to see me." She looked up. "Full name?" "James," Hannah said. "James redacted." Pause. Fingers on the keyboard. "I'm sorry, we don't have anyone by that name working here." Her throat tightened. "Could you check again? He might be going by Michael. Michael Weller." Another pause. "Mr. Weller isn't available for walk-ins." And again, "We don't have anyone by that other name. I need to see him. Just show him this." She fumbled in her bag and produced the crumpled magazine, pointing to the photo. "That's him." The receptionist took one look, then grew very still. Her jaw clenched. She pressed a button on her desk. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait here a moment." 2 minutes later, security arrived. Not hostile, not aggressive, but deliberate. A tall man in a blazer, earpiece in his ear, said calmly, "Ma'am, I'm going to have to escort you out." "Wait, no, please, just tell him Hannah's here. Just say my name." Her voice cracked. People in the lobby started to glance over. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said flatly. "You need to leave the building. Now." They moved to either side of her, not touching her, just hurting her. As she was walked through the lobby, one last desperate plea bubbled up in her chest. She stopped and turned sharply toward the hallway on the right, where a stretch of tinted glass offices looked out into the atrium. And she saw him. He was walking calmly behind the glass, suit sharp, beard trimmed, a leather folder in his hand, mid-conversation with another man. He didn't look hurried. He didn't look rattled. He didn't look at her. But she knew. Every atom in her body knew. Her knees nearly gave out. He passed by like she was invisible. Not a twitch of recognition. Not a flinch. Just perfect, polished disinterest. As if she were a stranger asking for spare change. The security guard gently touched her elbow. "This way, ma'am." Outside, the cold hit her like a slap. She stood on the curb, hands shaking, the magazine pressed to her chest like a lifeline. The world buzzed around her. Taxis honking, phones ringing, heels tapping on concrete. But she was numb to it all. She turned and looked back at the glass facade of the building. Somewhere behind those windows was the man she'd married. The man who used to flinch at her raised voice, who stayed quiet when she cut too deep. The man who once brought her soup when she had the flu and listened to her vent about clients for hours without complaint. That man didn't exist anymore. She wasn't shut out. She was denied. He saw her. He knew she came. And he chose to let her be escorted out like a nuisance. Like a solicitor with no badge. She wasn't a person to him anymore. She was a consequence. And he had no intention of ever opening the door again. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and sealed with a subtle embossed emblem she didn't recognize. No return address. Just her name, Hannah Reed. Her maiden name. She turned it over twice before opening it. Inside, a formal invitation. Elegant font. Heavy cardstock. The kind of thing that smelled like money and old rooms where power was inherited, not earned. The Founders Circle cordially invites you to a private dinner in celebration of Phase 2 development. One guest allowed. Non-transferable. The date was 3 weeks away. The location? A private club known only by reputation. An estate on a hill, surrounded by iron gates and men in earpieces. No RSVP. No contact info. Just the invitation. And one word. Written by hand in blue ink at the bottom. Attendance confirmed. She reread it 10 times. Then 100. Her first instinct was paranoia. A trap? A cruel joke? But the handwriting, she knew it. Neat. Deliberate. Like someone who still believed letters mattered. She hadn't heard from anyone since the day security escorted her out of Weller Urban. Her messages to the PI went unanswered. She assumed he'd either been paid off or warned off. But this was something else. She booked the flight that night. In the days leading up to the dinner, she tried to stay calm. Googled every article she could find on the event, the estate, the company, the founding team. Michael Weller appeared only once in an archived press release as a silent stakeholder with a strategic background. No photo, no quote, just a ghost name floating beneath the surface. She thought of texting him, of begging for a meeting before the dinner. But she didn't. Whatever this was, it had rules. And she didn't want to break the only door that had cracked open in months. The night of the dinner, she arrived early. The estate sat atop a hill, overlooking the skyline like a cathedral. A valet took her keys. No clipboard, no name check, just a nod. And then she was guided inside through tall oak doors into a reception room bathed in amber light. The ceiling soared. Jazz murmured softly through hidden speakers. Waiters in black carried silver trays of champagne flutes and amuse-bouches with names she couldn't pronounce. At the far end of the room, people mingled power suits, expensive watches, practice smiles. Titans of industry, or at least their handlers. And then she saw him, standing beneath a chandelier, alone, taller, his posture straighter, shoulders broader, hair neatly combed, beard sharp but familiar. His suit wasn't flashy, but it fit like it had been cut just for him. He wasn't pretending to belong here. He owned the space. He didn't glance at her. Not once. She took a step toward him. But a server intercepted her gently, offering a drink and a folded card. Her place card. It had no name. Just one word. Engraved in silver. Guest. She stared at it for a long time. No assigned table. No category. No identity. Guest. She drifted through the reception like she didn't quite exist. People nodded politely but didn't engage. A few recognized her last name from the old Foundation Gala days, but none of them asked why she was here, or who she was here for. She kept her eyes on him. He was moving now, conversing with a group near the terrace doors, laughing even. A small, private smile. Not the broken half-smile she remembered from their old life. This one had teeth, quiet confidence, control. She watched the way people responded to him, the space they gave him, the reverence. The man who used to sit quietly in their kitchen as she joked at his expense was gone. This man had authority now, and yet he hadn't left. He'd invited her to see it, to stand in this room and realize what he'd become, and what she had lost. The anticipation coiled in her gut. Not fear, not yet, but something sharper. She fingered the edges of the place card, feeling the embossed ridges like a wound beneath the surface. Why now? Why here? She wasn't sure what scared her more. What he might say, or what he wouldn't. She waited until the last glass of dessert wine was poured and the closing remarks were given. The room applauded politely, the jazz swelled slightly louder, and the guests began to disperse. Some toward the valet, some toward the private lounge for brandy and cigars. He didn't rush. He never did. She saw him break from the crowd, quiet and assured, folding a napkin beside his untouched dessert plate and nodding to the event host before turning toward the exit. No security, no entourage, just calm steps across the marble floor like a man walking through his own memory. That's when she moved. She stepped between him and the doorway, and for the first time in what felt like 1,000 years, they stood face to face. He stopped, not startled, not tense, just observing. His eyes landed on her like she was an architectural feature he hadn't expected but didn't mind. Not surprise, not annoyance, just neutrality. "James," she breathed. His head tilted slightly. "No one's called me that in a long time." "You didn't even blink," she said. "I was escorted out of your office like a stranger." "You were." Her throat tightened. "Why did you vanish? I thought you were dead." For a long moment he said nothing. He just studied her. Not like a man recalling an old love, but like someone evaluating whether a photo ever captured the truth. "When you laughed," he said finally, voice calm. "That night in the kitchen, it wasn't the first time, but it was the last straw. You weren't even drunk enough to pretend you didn't mean it. You just laughed, like I was a child, like my silence was petty. A phase." Her jaw clenched. "I didn't know it hurt you." He nodded slowly. "That was the problem." Her voice cracked. "So you erased yourself?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "No," a soft smile ghosted across his face. "I rewrote myself." She blinked, and it hit her like a punch. This wasn't a man who fled. He wasn't broken, wasn't nursing wounds or wandering in regret. He wasn't looking for closure or apology or even justice. He was free. And worse, he liked the version of him that she never got to meet. He looked over her shoulder at the room behind her, then back to her. "Do you remember what you said that night? Before you laughed?" I don't know. You called me invisible." Her chest caved slightly. "I didn't mean." "You did. And you weren't wrong. I was invisible. In that life. In your world. I worked, I paid bills, I endured your jokes, and I withered quietly. And every time I tried to speak, you turned it into a punchline." She blinked hard, mouth open, searching for something to anchor her. "I didn't hit you," she whispered. "I didn't cheat. I didn't scream or call you names." "No," he said, his voice still soft. "You just never saw me." Tears welled in her eyes, uninvited. "I see you now." He gave a small nod. "And now you understand." "Understand what?" He looked past her again, toward the glass doors that led out to the valet circle. "That ghosts aren't trapped. They're released." Her lip trembled. "Is this revenge?" "No. Revenge is loud. This is peace." She shook her head. "So that's it? You just walk away?" He stepped past her gently, not shoving, not brushing, just a clean sidestep. And then he paused, turned just enough to say, "I didn't leave to punish you. I left to save me. Her knees felt weak. Her voice was almost a whisper. Do you miss me? He smiled without warmth. I miss him, but he doesn't exist anymore. And then he walked through the doors and disappeared into the warm night air. No anger, no triumph, no bitterness. Just a man stepping fully into the life she never thought he could build without her. She stood there alone, blinking under the chandelier light, the invitation still in her hand like a question no one could answer. He hadn't come to haunt her. He'd come to remind her she was never the main character, and the ghost didn't need her permission to disappear. She pushed through the heavy glass doors, heels clicking wildly against the marble as if urgency alone could rewind time. The doorman barely glanced at her. She wasn't a guest here anymore, just a silhouette unraveling under spotlights and moonlight. The air outside hit sharp and cold, slicing through her thin dress as she scanned the dark valet circle. There. He was already walking down the curved path toward the private lot. No limo, no fanfare, just him, moving like a man who didn't run from things, only walked away once they'd served their purpose. She called out. Once, twice. James! No reaction. She caught up, her heels slipping slightly on the stone path. Michael James, please. Just one conversation. Just one. He stopped, slowly, like he was weighing the gravity of her voice. She caught her breath, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs. Can't we talk? She asked. Just once. Just us. He turned, and there it was, that face. The one she used to mock for being too soft. The one that used to flinch at her sarcasm. The one that once, just once, had cried in the passenger seat on the way home from his father's funeral when she told him to pull it together before the reception. But now it was stone. His eyes weren't cold, they were beyond cold. They were finished. You already did, he said, voice low but clear. Every joke, every shrug, every time you rolled your eyes when I tried to explain how tired I was, or why that joke in front of your friends cut a little too deep. She blinked, tears sliding hot and useless down her face. I never cheated on you, she whispered, like that was still her last defense. I never hurt you. His mouth twitched, just barely. You hurt me every time you turned me into a prop. Your sensitive husband. Your walking sigh. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know. No, he agreed. You didn't care to. She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. I was your ghost, he said, the words wrapping around her throat like a noose. Now I'm your lesson. He turned and walked. Not fast, not angry, just a steady, unshakable pace down the path and out of view. The valet didn't stop him. The world didn't pause. The stars didn't flicker. He didn't look back. And that, more than the silence, more than the vanishing, more than the rebuilt life and the cold dismissal, was what finally destroyed her. Not the words, the absence of hesitation, because she realized, in that moment, that she hadn't been left. She'd been removed, and there was no coming back from that.